Evening. I'd like to welcome you and call to order the July 23rd Port Orchard City Council regular meeting. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Fabulous to see this many people here this evening. We typically only get a couple, so it's good to see you all here. Just a couple of housekeeping items here. When it comes to our citizen comments, the first citizen comment period is for items on the agenda. If you're here to talk about the public hearing we're having on the emergency moratorium ordinance, that is a dedicated section of the meeting, so you don't need to comment at the beginning of the meeting for that item. If you're here for any item that's not on the agenda, there's a second public comment period at the end of the meeting. So hopefully we can get to your comments as efficiently as possible. So with that, we are to the approval of our agenda. Are there, Councilmember Ashby?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I would like to add to the consent agenda the excusal of Councilman Diener for personal reasons from this evening's meeting.
Second. So motion and a second to excuse Councilmember Diener from this evening's meeting and add that to the consent agenda. Is there any discussion of that? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that has been added to the consent agenda. Other additions or subtractions to tonight's meeting? Councilmember Clausen?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the agenda as modified.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the agenda as amended. Any further discussion of this evening's agenda? All in favor of approving the amended agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. We have an agenda approved. So now we are to our first citizen comment period. Is there anyone here wishing to testify or provide comment on anything on this evening's agenda, with the exception of the water issue? Okay.
Just an ability to comment on the water agenda?
That will be in a public hearing. There's a public hearing for that.
For this hearing?
There's a hearing on that this evening, and that's it'll be in just a couple minutes. Okay, that's fine. Fine to ask questions. Okay. Anyone wishing to comment on any item on the agenda except for the water issue? Okay, hearing none, we will close the first citizen comment period. We are to our consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Mayor, I would move to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second it.
Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, consent agenda is approved. Now we are to the public hearing, and we are having a public hearing on an emergency moratorium ordinance in the 580 and 660 water zones. Mr. Bond, do you have a staff report?
I do. Mayor and members of council, before I begin, I want to introduce a couple of new faces tonight. Jennifer Robertson, our land use attorney, is here tonight to answer any legal questions related to this action, and Jim Gross and Lauren Miller, you can wave, are here from VHC. They are our water system consultant, and so when we get to the business item related to this topic, they are available to answer any technical questions that you might have.
So, Mr. Bond, we've got a full house here tonight, and I know I've sat in that back row before, and it's tough to hear, so if we could just make sure you get a little closer to that microphone.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay, in 2016, the City Council updated the city's the city's comprehensive plan, including updates to the utilities element. The utilities element serves as the city's guiding document to ensure that the city will have adequate utilities available for projected growth. This 2016 update was based on the city's water facilities plan, which was last updated in 2011. The city is currently in the process of updating the water facilities plan as required by the state of Washington. This work is expected to be completed by the end of the year, or at the latest in early 2020. BHC Consultants is providing the consulting services to the city for this update. During the work on updating the water facilities plan, additional data was provided that is more precise and is based upon actual water usage. This more precise data, coupled with the work of reviewing mandated water system design standards led the city to discover that there are serious deficits in the current water facilities in the 580 and 660 water zones. In early June 2019, the city received water peaking factor data and calculations, water usage data for the 580 pressure zone, fire storage requirement calculations, and information about the ability of Bremerton to supply water under an agreement between the two cities. All of these factors together demonstrated that the 580 and 660 zones have no existing capacity and are actually oversubscribed with connections. These deficits involve both insufficient water storage facilities and inadequate water source supplies. Both source and storage are factors in the equations for determining the number of water connections available in accordance with the Washington State Office of Drinking Water 2009 Water System Design Manual. There are now significant concerns about the development and growth in the 580 and 660 water zones due to the availability of adequate water storage facilities and source for serving that area and the ability to provide continuous uninterrupted water supply. On June 11, 2019, the City Council adopted the emergency moratorium under Ordinance Number 20-19. This ordinance established a 6-month moratorium on acceptance of certain development permit applications in the 580 and 660 water zones of Port Orchard. Specifically, the moratorium placed a pause on acceptance of any permits for buildings or structures which need to be connected to water service in these zones. State law requires a public hearing to be held within 60 days of the adoption of the ordinance number 20-19. A public hearing was held earlier, which is the public hearing is being held tonight. In your staff report, you'll find a plethora of technical information which BHC is prepared to speak to should you have any questions. I will not get into all those details right now. I do want to point out that in your packet you have a proposed ordinance 020-19A, including a red line copy that shows the changes between the previously adopted ordinance and this new proposed ordinance. You also have a technical memo from BHC. You also have a technical draft memo from HDR Engineers, which is a company that McCormick Communities has hired to evaluate the water system in the 580 and 660 zones. And you also have a letter from the City of Bremerton concerning the moratorium. With that said, I would recommend that you open the public hearing.
Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Bond. I'm going to open the public hearing. We typically don't limit the time of the testimony in a public hearing, but we have a large crowd tonight, and so if you could keep your comments to about 5 minutes per speaker, that way we have a chance to hear from everyone. I have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people signed up on a list, and after I get through the list, then I'll ask for other folks in the audience that wish to speak. So with that, I'll start with the first person. I will now open the public hearing on this matter and call the first name, which is Eric Campbell. So if you could step to the microphone and identify yourself for the record.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. I'm Eric Campbell with McCormick Communities, and I'm going to just briefly lead off and then introduce a couple other of speakers that we're going to have tonight to speak on this issue. First and foremost, I want to, always, mention our goal has always been and is to build a water infrastructure system that meets the needs of the residents of McCormick and the citizens of Port Orchard within the 580 and some further data out to 660. We know the planning for the water infrastructure system is a complex issue anytime you do it, but it's even more difficult task when you have changing data, assumptions, and analysis, as I know you are all pretty aware that's been going over the last 4 years. Further to that, the complexity is when you have 3 jurisdictions trying to do it together. And that's, I've done many developments for my career, and this is a very rare situation where you have 2 water purveyors working together and, information changing back and forth. And then you have also an independent fire district. Now, working together requires parties that are cooperative, transparent, and equitable. And following these principles really enables a system that will be, I believe, will be designed that will not only benefits all parties, but can be done in a cost-effective manner and in an expedited manner. So to add some clarity to tonight, because I think as you see with the packet, even the most recent July 18th memo from BHC, it leaves a lot of questions for everyone in the room. And so I'm going to be having Pat Schneider of Foster and Pepper speak tonight, and then Greg Krabbe with Windward, and I also have our consultants of HDRs here in case we have technical questions after the evening that's spoken, like you have with BHC. As you know, I'm disappointed the moratorium was put forth, and I truly believe, I think especially after we hear more detailed analysis tonight, that we really should be looking for a continuation of the moratorium, or no, a continuation, let me say, of this hearing for 2 weeks, because I really believe when we work with the city of Bremerton here, hopefully tomorrow, that a couple of small minor tweaks will really change what we believe is the availability of having more building permits. So that with being said, I'll move it to the next speaker. And at the end of the evening, if there is any other questions upon me, please let me know. I'll be glad to come up and speak. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Before I call the next person, if you've got anything, written documents or a letter that you would like to submit to the council, Clerk Reinderson here at the end of the dais there, the staff table, will be happy to take that from you. So the next person on our list is Pat Schneider.
I would ask if possible if Greg Krabbe go ahead of me, please.
Absolutely. Mr. Krabbe, Craig Krabbe.
Good evening, Mayor, Mr. Mayor, Council. My name is Greg Krabbe. I'm a registered civil engineer here in the state of Washington and am a representative of McCormick Communities. So tonight I'll submit a letter with some comments on the materials that have been used to instigate or implement this moratorium. I think initially we requested the materials that were used to start the moratorium here several weeks ago, and this is what we received, just a few pages. We felt that it really wasn't sufficient to document the underlying circumstance with this very complicated water system serving the McCormick Woods community. So subsequently, we went ahead and hired HDR to do a full analysis. And I should say that this is only 150 pages of the some 2,000 pages of water use data that we went through in order to establish this report. This report was scoped to find a solution, not to represent the problem. And we believe that there is a solution. Granted, it will be short-term until a new tank can be constructed, but it is a solution that would allow you to lift the moratorium so that we can move forward together to solve the problem in a bigger and better way. Now, there's a couple things I wanted to point out. One of them in particular, today I received a phone call from Ned Lever at the city of Bremerton, and you probably know that we will be meeting with them tomorrow to talk about having Bremerton increase their commitment to pump into this water zone, which could potentially allow you to lift the moratorium. One of the things he pointed out to me was that the pumping rate that is represented on BHC's more recent analysis, which we're grateful for, this is the kind of material you should be using to make these decisions, they are using a pumping rate of 350 gallons per minute. What Ned pointed out to me was that this is Bremerton's contractual commitment to the city of Port Orchard. It doesn't represent the water pumped into Bremerton's own service area within the 580 zone. So in a very simple calculation, I just prorated it across. The actual rate of pumping into the 580 zone from Bremerton is about 500 GPM. And we know that their system actually can only pump at about 600 GPM. So I think right here in this document that's being used to instigate this moratorium, there is an error, and I think it can be corrected. I think the meeting tomorrow with Bremerton is going to open up a lot of opportunities, and I think it's appropriate for us in the city to explore those opportunities before we instigate a moratorium. One other point I'd like to make is some weeks ago we received a letter from the fire marshal that calculated the fire demand requirement or the fire storage requirement for the church, which is the governing commercial structure in the 580 zone. Immediately, we were concerned that this was calculated incorrectly because the fire marshal had assumed a building type of a 5B building type, and we thought it should have been a 5A building type. So we hired an architect, and the architect toured the church. The architect downloaded the actual construction plans for the church, did a thorough review, and concluded that, in fact, the building should be classified as a 5A building. When you look at the International Fire Code matrix, and you input, I failed to bring it, but if you look at the fire code and you input a type 5A building, it literally cuts the fire storage in half. So again, this is a document. The fire chief's document is cited in your argument for the moratorium, and we think it's wrong. We think that you should take a couple of extra weeks to look at some of these things and get it right. That's all I have to say. If you have any questions, let me know.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Krabby. Back to Pat Schneider.
Good evening. I'm Pat Schneider, here as the legal representative of McCormick Communities. I have a letter. I've made enough copies for each of the council members and the mayor and the staff. I've also attached to it an earlier letter from March that I wrote to the mayor and the department directors, and I would ask that you consider the content of this letter before you take action this evening. I want to briefly summarize the main points that are in the letter and also make a couple of additional points that I ask you to take into consideration before you act this evening. The ordinance that was enacted on June 11th was based upon information presented to you in executive session. And as you know, we have filed an action saying that was a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act, because yes, you can go in executive session to talk about potential litigation, but your legislative actions have to be based on facts that are presented in public and available for the public to scrutinize. We have spent the last couple of weeks or the multiple weeks since the enactment of the moratorium trying to get on top of those facts, which is why McCormick has spent a lot of money on an independent evaluation to come up with facts. And the point we're at this evening, I think, is between the two reports, there's actually quite a bit of agreement about the situation. There's a fundamental error that Mr. Krabby described, in that this 350 in the BHC report is allocated to the entire 580 zone, when in fact Bremerton is pumping that only to the Port Orchard portion of the zone. So it overstates the problem. You have a fundamental factual mistake right there. If you go through the whereas clauses, from my point of view, there are multiple whereas clauses in the new ordinance that you are asked to approve, which are either inaccurate or at least affirmatively misleading. And an example of that is the discussion of the 2007 agreement with my client's predecessor to fund and build with reasonable reimbursement of a water tank. My client has been ready and willing to do that for a long time and has been trying to reach agreement with the city, and the city has declined to allow my client to go ahead with that agreement because the city wants to enlarge the size of the tank. There's a lot to the story that isn't presented in these whereas clauses, but the fundamental point that I ask you to take into account tonight is that the 350 gallons that you have been purchasing from the city of Bremerton, you have been purchasing since 2001. This is not a crisis, it's not an emergency, it's not new information. You could have gone to the city of Bremerton at any point since 2001 and negotiated more water. The city has expressed its willingness to McCormick multiple times in the last few months that it is willing to enter into those negotiations. We finally have a meeting scheduled tomorrow for those negotiations to take place, and we believe we believe our consultants and your consultants are going to be able to reach agreement that a very modest increase in that flow of 350 gallons per minute would take away any need for the moratorium for a period of time that would be sufficient to construct a tank to solve the storage problem. The water flow problem can be solved simply by agreement with Bremerton, and you have it within your power to enter into that agreement tomorrow if you want to. So to say that there's a public health and safety emergency that justifies a moratorium when it can be solved and the emergency and the urgency taken away by a simple agreement that can be negotiated, that could have been negotiated at any period of time for years, and that the negotiations are going to take place on tomorrow, is simply not appropriate. So I strongly encourage you to continue this public hearing for 2 weeks. You have 2 more council member meetings scheduled within the 60 days that the state statute gives you to hold a public hearing after you enact a moratorium without one. See what happens in those 2 weeks, and then come back and hold a resumed public hearing. Take the additional information that is learned from the negotiations with the city of Bremerton and by allowing the consultants to work with one another cooperatively to see if they can reach agreement, and then make a decision in light of that additional information about whether the moratorium is appropriate or whether it ought to be rescinded. I strongly urge you to do that. I think you need full and fair and accurate information to make a decision. I don't believe you have it at the moment. At the very least, you don't have the information that is going to be gained from meeting with the city of Bremerton. And I finally have to conclude on an unhappy note, which is that this moratorium has already caused damages to my client. They've already lost contracts as a result. They are looking at millions of dollars in damages if they are not able to get water to the lots for which they have final plat approval. Those damages are entirely unnecessary. They are within your control to prevent. But if those damages happen, we have no choice but to seek to recover them. Because again, we think this is a choice the city is making and not something that's compelled by facts and circumstances. So I strongly encourage you to continue this public hearing, be fully and completely informed of the facts, and then come back in 2 weeks and make a decision then. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next person on our sign-up sheet is Karen Van Acker.
Mayor, I have a question. We were first in the room, and we were first on the sheet.
I have two sheets. I have two sheets. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, you're doing
Okay. You could be correct. So, but we'll continue as.
My name's Karen Vanden Acker, and I live in McCormick Woods. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the McCormick Residents Advocacy Group. We commend the mayor and the city council for taking a forward-looking approach to our antiquated water and complicated water and sewer system. I will focus on questions the public has as to why a water moratorium has been issued while a large 6-year capital improvement plan is underway. I count 19 water projects currently funded under the updated 6-year plan and to be completed between January 2016 and December 2021. Very little information has been shared with ratepayers regarding the progress of the water projects. In the city's effort to become more transparent, we respectfully request a published update on each water project. For example, whether or not the project has been completed on budget, and will unfinished projects be completed by the end of 2021. Answers to these questions will help us understand why you have called for an emergency moratorium in zones 580 and 660 Of particular interest to McCormick homeowners is an update on the 3 existing domestic wells in McCormick Woods 1, 2, and 3. And I'm not quite sure what well 11 has to do with McCormick Woods. We understand the water utility received a loan from the Department of Health Drinking Water State Revolving Fund for well 10. The other projects will be funded by rates and connection charges. It's my understanding that our purchase of water from Bremerton is expensive. I don't know if that's true or not. But we've been trying to get out of this agreement for some time. And I don't know if we did indeed get out in 2018, as I believe our contract ended with them in 2018, if it was renewed. I don't know that. But Engineer Krabby is advocating us to now get more water from Bremerton and use some of their facilities. And I don't agree with that at all. So I don't want the moratorium lifted at this time until things are straightened out a little bit more. Will the emergency ordinance result in higher water rates to homeowners? The water rate increase levied in January 2016 through 2020 were exorbitant, and increased rates after 2020 would be unacceptable to most homeowners, especially those on fixed incomes. The city will need to secure funding through other sources, and I hope that they work toward that goal rather than raising rates. We would like to know how much the city charges developers in the way of impact fees, because we believe they might not be enough, because we're so short of cash, it seems. Impact fees on new or proposed development help fund and pay for the construction or needed expansion of off-site capital improvements. But it seems like the ratepayers are shouldering that burden. I want to thank you for allowing our voice to be heard regarding the emergency water moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, we are on to the second sheet, which would appear should have been the first sheet, but I apologize. The first name on that list is Linda Fisher.
My name's Linda Fisher, and I reside in McCormick Woods. I've been tasked by the newly formed McCormick Residents Advocacy Group to attend this public hearing on their behalf and to share their expressed interests in Ordinance 02019, the Port Orchard Emergency Water Moratorium. Before I begin my testimony, I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity. It's the first opportunity I've ever had to speak to you. But let me begin first by talking about your customers of the water system. Their first concern is to look for alternatives. Our residents do not want to see this emergency water moratorium as a reason for another dramatic increase in our water rates. We encourage the city to secure funding through state and federal grants and to mitigate future rate increases to facilitate continued growth through rather than burdening the existing homeowners with increased taxes and increased utility rates. Even today, existing water provisioning is unreliable. Even as the ordinance declares a water emergency and a 6-month moratorium on further development, McCormick residents in Water Zone 580 are currently finding water provisioning to their homes unreliable. McCormick residents have experienced a periodic reduced water pressure along with a complete interruption of flow of water. As a result, even before this moratorium, McCormick residents experience unreliable water provisioning to their homes. Furthermore, today homeowners are too heavily burdened by the costs. The water rates seem reasonable at first glance until you understand the charges adopted in June 2015 increased the tier pricing structure within the water rates. Several McCormick residents think the second-tier pricing starts unreasonably low, forcing a household of 2 adults to quickly move to second-tier pricing every month. These residents do not have irrigation systems and tell me they practice ongoing water conservation. Residents who moved to our area in the past 1 to 2 years have compared their tier usage of our rates to other regional cities, even California, and find them very high. One of our residents called the city water department, talked to a very nice lady, who in fact acknowledged the fact that the second tier, agreed, is set very low bar. So how did the city shift its financial burden? The consultant's report in 2015 recommended the water usage tiers expand and the costs be adjusted upward. The old tier structure, 5,000 to 30,000, tier was broken into 3 tiers, 5,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 20,000, 20,000 to 30,000. You all know this. But the rate differential was 10% between tiers, and the typical resident uses an average of 7,000 gallons. What does this mean? This means that the same amount of water that a homeowner used in 2015 today, the same amount of water is an increase of almost 20%. And I pulled the tier pricing from the consultant's report. Then you add the rate base increase. In 2015, it was $50.70 as a rate base for water. It is now $81.20. Next year, it'll be $88.80. If you look at the rate base comparisons to Kitsap County, Gig Harbor is $41.42. Paulsville is $41.51. Bremerton is $43.42. But coming in number 1, top in the list, is Port Orchard at $54.65. In conclusion, back in 2015, the city of Port Orchard adopted the Katie Isaacson's proposal, which subsequently doubled sewer and water rates by 2020. The adoption of this proposal was in order to allow water and sewer utilities operate in the black and to pay for most of the critical capital projects. And yet today, here we are, faced with a moratorium. But potentially that may not be the case after what I've just heard. We live in one of the fastest growing cities in Kitsap County, with new residents arriving every day. We have an aggressive developer. This sleepy borough of 10 years ago doesn't exist today. Port Orchard is growing. What this really means is that we urge this city council to consider adding within the city's 2020 comprehensive plan amendments establishing an impact fee program that guides you on how to grow equitably. That offers developers and current homeowners an equitable solution for us all. Additionally, we encourage the city to secure funding through private foundations, state or federal grants, which you've already done in many cases. My congratulations. The residents expect to see water rate increases stabilize. In other words, we don't want to see this newly discovered shortfall in water availability become a greater burden on the existing homeowners in Port Orchard today. We thank you very much for the job you've done so far. We understand it's a task that very few of us would like to handle ourselves. I congratulate you on getting us where we are today, and I hope you can get us into the future at lower costs. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next person on our list is Chris Hutchinson.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Hutchinson. I'm a longtime Port Orchard resident from off Anderson Hill Road. Apologies. I had originally, well, I've spent the last couple of years compiling a documentary of sorts, a presentation, but it's an hour in length and isn't really suitable for this forum. So I'm going to have to convert it to something, and perhaps I can submit it to the council members in a more readable form.
The city clerk would be the appropriate.
Our home was built in 1944, as was the well that we use for water. It's been adequate up until last 3 years, We draw from an aquifer that runs nearly parallel with Anderson Hill Road and ends nearly at the end or just beyond Tremont in the 580 or 508 watershed or district. With the addition at the head of Anderson Hill Road, that being the top, if you're going from Sinclair Inlet, on the other side is a new development, new to us in the last couple of years. And the one on the south side of Anderson Hill Road, the deforestation alone is probably the biggest contributor because of the evaporation. And then covering the land with asphalt prevents water that would otherwise seep through and feed that aquifer. And the trees that used to be there keep the temperature down so as to keep the moisture in the ground and refueling, if you will, the aquifers. In the last 2 years, we, due to the construction, or coincidentally, which is unlikely, we've lost 1,900 gallons from our well. I'm sorry, I was stepping away here. Or put in another perspective, we've lost 20 feet of our 25-foot well. We had a fire in the backyard right on the line. We had 50-year-old Douglas fir trees in that zone. And we were unable to contain it with our own water because the water didn't exist. We had to call the fire department, and as a result, we lost both properties, total lost some 1/8 of an acre of forest that we had in our backyards. So all I'm trying to do is attest to the effects of the new construction that we've seen here. Those of us who built and maintained Port Orchard before the newcomers, if you will, or those of McCormick Woods or the McCormick buildings or developments that have come up in recent years. And if you think about the aquifer as a bottle, that say a 2-liter bottle that you get from your regular stores, we're at the base, we're at the bottom of that aquifer, our residents, and if we're that low, the bottle is those upstream from us have to dig deeper in order to get water. And that's,
Mr. Hutchinson?
as a result, I'm trying to...
Mr. Hutchinson, you need to direct your comments directly to the moratorium and not your own
What I'm trying
well
to
system.
say, those of us who have lived here a long time have been able to appreciate the changes that the new construction and the deforestation as a result have the effects that it's had on the community. Now, I'm not sure that that's beneficial or would be considered beneficial. I suppose that's a matter of opinion. But nonetheless, it's had detrimental effects from my perspective and in our own neighborhood because we've lost water as a direct result, and we're now forced to judiciously take showers. It affects our personal hygiene, and it prevents us from fighting fires in our own neighborhood. Our next door neighbor, directly next door neighbor, whose home is also built in 44, from July 1 on has no water whatsoever. So 20
Mr.
foot of
Hutchinson,
water.
you-
We just
you need
lost a lot of
direct
water
your-
as a result.
Direct your comments to the moratorium and not your personal.
Oh, I don't mean to be on a personal level. I'm just saying, I'm just stating the effects. And regarding the moratorium, I applaud the moratorium, and I thank you for taking our comments. I'm in the red light, and I'm sorry I rambled. Like I said, I had a well-organized thing, but it's just not suitable for this forum. I would encourage an extension of the moratorium until such time as I have to conclude. I don't want to take other people's times, but I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to a more opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, we are to the last person on our sign-up sheet, and then I will take comments from other individuals in the audience. We have Nancy Morgan.
I passed at this time. The first three speakers answered many of my questions.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else in the audience would like to address the council in regards to this matter? Okay. Okay, please step forward and identify yourself for the record.
My name is Denise Gallegos, and I live in Port Orchard. And I want to address what the last gentleman said in terms of the aquifer. I think that is directly about the moratorium, and to say it's not speaking to it is a definite misunderstanding of what he's saying. What he's saying is there's not enough water, and that is not something that's going to go back to filling up the bottle. It's going to continue to empty. So the moratorium has said, stop, let's look at what's happening. Port Orchard's running out of water. I don't live adjacent to McCormick and Woods, but I do have 2 streams on my property. And early this year, at a time when it shouldn't have been, the streams were almost dry. They are salmon spawning streams. There are no salmon that can come up my streams right now. The weather is changing, the aquifer is dropping, and we're still pumping more and more and more water. So if adequate means are not forefront in plans for construction in the Port Orchard area, we need to stop and think about how they have to be put forward, how that we're going to go forward in the next 10, 15, 20, 100 years. And if we're not taking the time to do that, we need to. And to put a moratorium on for a period of time to just investigate it for a while seems a very small investment. And it is just as personal for a corporation, which has been deemed people in our country, to step up and say, we have damages, as it is for this gentleman to say, I have damages. All this construction has damaged me. I have a well that is now 1/5 of the capacity it was before. His neighbor has a well that's 0 of the capacity it was before. How much of that is due to climate change? How much of that is due to construction? Hard to say. Nonetheless, your constituents are facing that in Port Orchard, and it is incumbent upon you to consider that, just as it is incumbent to hear the personal experience of the corporation behind McCormick & Woods and their attorney.
Thank you for your comments. Others wishing to address the council on this matter in the public hearing? Yes, sir. Please step forward and identify yourself for the record.
Nick Tosti with McCormick Communities. And I can speak to the development of the infrastructure, water infrastructure. I know Greg earlier talked about an agreement with Bremerton, but long-term, obviously, we will need a reservoir tank. And for us, if we were able to get the proper information and technical data, it would take 6 to 12 months to have that operating in the field. So a long-term solution for water shortage issues, we can enact relatively quickly.
Thank you for your comments. Others wish? Yes, sir. Please step forward and identify yourself for the record. Okay, well, hold on till you, wait till you get to the microphone.
I have a loud voice.
Okay.
So, my name is Ruckus. I live over on Port Orchard.
Can you identify yourself for the record? The microphone doesn't pick you up over there.
My name is Ruckus.
Okay.
R-U-K-U-S. So I live in Port Orchard, and I think we all have to understand that most of our water comes from the Gold Mountain Reservoir, and it's also, most of the water in Port Orchard is groundwater. So it's not just aquifers, it is, but it's also groundwater, and I think the problem that we're talking about, putting in tanks, but if you're only pumping out so much, you can't putting in a tank is not going to matter. You know what I'm saying? It's like you can put a tank in all day long, But if
Sir?
if you're not filling the water back in, it doesn't matter.
Sir, please address the council.
You know what I'm saying? So I think you're not only looking at logistics, but you're also looking at there's just not enough coming down. You know, and we also have a lot more people coming into the North Sound. And so that Golden Mountain Reservoir also feeds Polesbo, I think. And so the north sound of Kitsap is getting a lot more development, and it's all coming from Gold Mountain. You know, so yeah, it's about cost. You know, it's going to cost more money, but there's only so much that can come into Gold Mountain that can feed all the Class A, B wells. You know, because if the rainfall is not coming down, Class A, B wells, they won't fill up as fast. So, you know, if you put another tank in, it's fine. But if you're not filling up Class A, B wells with the rainfall, it doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Others wishing to address the council on this matter? All right, with that, may I have a motion from the council to close the public hearing? Councilmember Ashby.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
Second from Councilmember Lucarelli. Discussion regarding closing the public hearing? Hearing none, all in favor of closing the public hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, I will close the public hearing. And I would like to thank everyone that came here tonight. It's very important that we hear from our entire community. And I would also like to take a moment to thank McCormick Communities for working with the city on this water issue. We appreciate you coming to the table to work collaboratively with the city to find the most effective solutions to this issue, storage and source in the 580 zone. We remain committed to working with you to solve these challenges as quickly as possible so that we can lift this moratorium and keep your development moving forward. For that ends my remarks. Do council have questions for staff at this time? Would you like to wait till we get to the business item?
I'll wait.
Wait for the business item, okay. We are moving on to our business items, and the first of which is the issue that we just had the hearing on, adoption of an emergency moratorium ordinance in the 580 and 660 water zones. Mr. Bond?
Yes, thank you. I think we've heard a lot tonight, and I would like to direct your attention to page 72 of your packet, which outlines the alternatives for action concerning the moratorium. Towards the bottom of that page, it states that no motion is necessary if the council does not wish to make any amendments or clarification on the emergency ordinance number 02019. 02019 would remain in effect for 6 months, expiring on December 11, 2019. However, if council desires to amend or make clarifications to emergency ordinance 02019, adopted June 11, 2019, then 2 motions are possible. There's the staff recommended option of adopting a revised emergency ordinance 02019A, and that's what is included in Exhibit 1 to the agenda bill. Or you could amend and adopt revised emergency ordinance 02019A and make additional modifications to the ordinance as you see fit. And so our recommendation at this time, and I realize the staff report left off the letter A at the end of the ordinance, but our recommendation is to adopt ordinance 02019A as attached. And if you have additional questions for either BHC or Jennifer Robertson or myself, we're happy to address those based on the testimony that you've heard tonight.
Council?
So my question, Mayor, is one of process.
Okay.
So
Could
if...
you maybe move your microphone
I'm
just
sorry.
a little closer?
Yeah. So my question is one of process. So if we do nothing and hold, we can have another public hearing, as was suggested, as we have more information. If we adopt a resolution, wrong word, but if we adopt the motion, a motion to continue it, and discussions continue between the cities and the different organizations, we could come back and end the moratorium at any time, could we not? Or does it last for 6 months?
It does, as soon as we come to resolution or an agreement to, and there are negotiations scheduled for tomorrow, or at least meeting with the parties, the consultants and the City of Bremerton and our staff. We've been in ongoing negotiations and regarding these improvements, and we wish to continue those negotiations. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, if as soon as we reach an agreement for those improvements, whatever the consultants and the engineers deem appropriate, and we can reach an agreement to those improvements which we believe are necessary, and we've heard some testimony, maybe they're not. We need the consultants and the engineers to agree to that data and what are the correct numbers before we can make a request to the City of Bremerton on how much water we need, and then from there enter into an agreement for those improvements that we're hearing that the developer is willing to make. So I believe once we enter into an agreement, we could lift this moratorium, correctly?
That's correct. The moratorium that was passed in June, you've held the required public hearing as required by state law. If you do nothing tonight, that remains in effect until it is lifted or until it expires, which is in December. The recommendation tonight is to adopt an amended ordinance, which would have the same expiration date of December. But just like the existing ordinance, the emergency moratorium that was passed in June, at any time, the council can direct staff to bring forward an ordinance dissolving the moratorium at an earlier date. So that is something that can happen anytime. And you also do not need to hold another public hearing on the existing moratorium unless you want to extend it beyond the 6 months, but you can take public comment at any council meeting and, like I said, direct staff to bring forward an ordinance dissolving the moratorium.
Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you, Mayor.
Other questions for staff?
I would ask a
Councilmember Trim.
question of staff. Obviously, very, very complicated issue with a lot of moving parts, and I think from a policy standpoint, the devil's in the details, and we really have to have the correct data, and I know over the past 12 months, 18 months, it's been really difficult, I know for myself, it seems like it's continuing to be a moving target, and so tonight, can I ask why you're recommending the amended version of the moratorium, and what's the driving force of that?
There's a couple of reasons why. One is that the amended one adds a lot more facts because we've gotten more information from our technical experts, so that it also recognizes that we held the public hearing, and it cleans up some of the language in the ordinance, and it reaffirms the prior ordinance, which has been called into question, which I don't believe has merit, but it reaffirms it. So there's the reasons why we recommend the amended ordinance. It still has the same impact on actually what it applies to in the permits that are put on pause, but the facts are different, and you guys are allowed to make additional findings following the public hearing. And of course, part of the information that you received with your packet are the 2 reports from the city's water consultant and from McCormick Communities water consultant, which had a lot of the same conclusions. That was addressed in the agenda memo, where some of the assumptions that were in the HDR report specifically assumed more source from Bremerton than we are contractually allowed to get from Bremerton, that they're required to provide us. So, and the staff or the consultants can address that in more detail.
Okay, Mr. Clausen?
I just, I have a comment and then a question at the end of my comment. So the comment is that in reading, my comment is in reading the ordinance, the proposed ordinance, some 7 or 8 pages of it, I think it does a nice job of organizing all of the issues and putting them more or less in, if you will, chronological order or in order of issues from kind of the changing landscapes that we've been experienced with the changes from the fire district on water storage to the whole issue of our agreements with the city of Bremerton and so on. So I think the adoption of this ordinance really clarifies the issue at hand, and I think we should move forward with that. I guess my question is more of just confirmation that there's nothing in this ordinance that would preclude us from continuing to work towards a solution, whether it be with the city of Bremerton, with the developers, or whomever, the fire district, all of the players involved in this particular issue. We could still move forward, and certainly my expectation is that we would to reach a solution to this challenge that we have. Is that the correct assumption?
Well, yes, I mean, we have a meeting scheduled with City Bremerton tomorrow. I know that my conversation with the city this morning unfortunately differed from Greg, so that'll be a good opportunity to vet that. And we've reached out to the fire district, and we're planning on meeting next week. So I think this will get resolved. But I
guess my point is that we were requested to do nothing for 2 weeks. Well, doing nothing is the moratorium is in place now, and that moratorium would continue for 2 weeks. So by adopting this particular ordinance, we're simply clarifying all of the issues related to the implementation of the moratorium, and nothing changes. So I don't see any issue personally with adopting this ordinance, because really from the moratorium standpoint, nothing's changed.
Others wishing to comment or have questions? Councilmember Ashby?
Well, I don't have a question. I was going to make a motion.
Okay, please do.
Yes. I move to adopt ordinance number 020-19-A, imposing a temporary 6-month moratorium on the acceptance of certain development in the 580 and 660 water zones of Port Orchard, setting forth findings of fact in support of this moratorium, imposing the moratorium, stating the effect on vested rights, providing for exclusions, authorizing interpretive authority, providing for the severability, declaring an emergency, setting the duration, and establishing an immediate effective date.
Second.
Okay, second by Councilmember Clausen. Further discussion or questions of staff?
I would.
Councilmember Ashby, please, go ahead.
I have just read all of the technical reports that were given to us, and I find conflicting numbers. I find conflicting assumptions. So it's important to me, before a moratorium is lifted, that those differences be reconciled, and that a solution that I can understand and that I can explain to my constituents be found.
And that is the purpose of the meeting tomorrow. So, other questions or comments? Okay, with that, you'll be voting on the adoption of an emergency ordinance in the 580 and 660 water zones. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We are to our second business item, which is adoption of an ordinance repealing number 952. I think we might take just a 2-minute break here and let folks that wish to leave the room, and we'll go back to our business meeting.